This is the Keys to the Kingdom podcast, where we explore how the psychedelic renaissance becomes accessible to everyone. I'm your host, Tammy Sanders, and I'm glad you're with us. Thanks so much for listening. Curtis Chappell joins us from the future in Brisbane, Australia, not just because of our time difference, but also because of how forward-thinking Australian companies and regulatory agencies have been when it comes to applied blockchain. An American expat who calls Australia home, Curtis is now a blockchain educator, consultant, and entrepreneur. He's a lead trainer for the Blockchain Collective, an Australia-based org that designed the world's first government-accredited blockchain certification. And he works with Beef Ledger, one of the world's first applied blockchain solutions designed to distribute and sell consumer goods internationally. Curtis's keys are blockchain, education, and innovation. He's particularly skilled at using real-world examples to make the world of blockchain accessible to everyday people. In our conversation, Curtis demystifies the language of blockchain and digs into how blockchain could make psychedelics safer and more accessible, especially at scale. Curtis, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me for this conversation. It's great to have you.
Well, thanks to you. Thank you so much, Tammy, for having me along today. Great to be with you.
Now, it's pretty late for you, right? Because you're sitting in, is it Brisbane? Are you in Brisbane, Australia?
I'm in Brisbane, Australia. It's just before midday here.
Okay. All right. Okay. So it's like midday tomorrow.
Correct. I'm about 12 hours ahead of you.
I'm in the future. Okay. I love it. All right.
So funny.
Yeah, right on. All right.
Time is a mystical thing.
Time is very mystical and very, very contextual. And actually, I'm really glad you used that word mystical, because one of the things that came to mind for this conversation, we've had a bunch of prep. It's been really, really helpful. And I realize, one of the things that you are really sort of capable at is sort of demystifying and destigmatizing blockchain.
Right.
And blockchain to some degree has kind of a similar accessibility challenge to psychedelics, right? It's got stigma, and it's just
Absolutely.
really hard to understand. Right?
It's a great analogy, actually. Yeah, I hadn't really put those two together, but you're spot on.
Yeah. So I want to actually start us off. Well, actually, before I do that, before I start us off with sort of demystifying blockchain a bit, I actually want to ask you. You're also one of the few folks I've talked to sort of outside of psychedelics professionally. Like, you're not sort of in the psychedelic landscape or ecosystem. It's not what you do for work. What's your relationship with psychedelics, or what's your experience with psychedelics? Has it been relevant? Have they been relevant to you at all?
Well, absolutely. Certainly, excuse me, when I was younger, I'm in my mid 50s now. So let's say 35 years ago, they were, taking LSD was kind of part of what my peer group did. And and it was interesting because most of my quote unquote trips, at least with LSD, were with groups of people. And that was actually pretty cool, because when you're in a group of people, everyone's kind of on the same wavelength. You go through that whole laugh attack thing, and then you go through the, oh my God, this is an amazing world. And then everyone starts going off on their own little paths. But you can go along on the path with them or not, right? You can choose to go down your path or go down the path with someone else. So I always thought that was interesting. But I did notice.
Can I ask you a quick question? And hopefully don't lose your train of thought about what you noticed. I want to come back to that. Yep. How is it that you were having these experiences in groups? Like I didn't have groups like this. Like, who were these groups? Like, who was this sort of group of folks that you hung out with that this is what you all did?
We just had a big circle of about 20 of us. And oftentimes there'd be 4, 5, 8, 10. I remember one time was probably one of the most amazing experiences I had. We drove out. So I grew up in Florida, and on the coast in Florida, and just south of where we used to live, you could go down, drive down south and pull off the side of the road. And there were these huge not mountains, but sand dunes, right? And we're talking hundreds of feet tall. And we all went out there and spent the whole day and dropped a microdot, and we just had some crazy experiences. We were making sand signals to each other from tops of different sand dunes. And I'll never forget, we it was amazing. We found this little tiny spider web, and it was a perfect spider web. But because it was in a sand dune, sand, grains of sand had attached itself. So this, as you looked at it from certain angles, of course, the sun was reflecting through the sand, and we for years we called that the web of wisdom. I mean, that was like in our group for years after that. So we had these crazy reality of, understandings of reality that only you can get when you're tripping.
Yeah.
And that became very memorable and part of our group story. So it's even now, I mean, coming back, it's rushing back to me now when I think about it. It was such a powerful thing. So I just had a group of people that's what we did for fun on the weekends.
Yeah. Interesting too. You talk about sort of having this experience, this powerful experience of what reality could be. It's no wonder that you landed in technology, and we're talking about blockchain, which is all about sort of what reality in the future can be. It seems to me like your brain was kind of primed for, your mind was kind of primed for being able to comfortably get into these sort of futurescape situations.
It's interesting you say that, and I don't want to come off, like pro psychedelics, to the extent that that's all there is, but I do think that those people on the planet, of which there are a lot more than those of us who have experienced psychedelics, are really missing out on what life and reality is, because they only have that singular view of that perception that they've always had. And as you well know, psychedelics change that perception quite dramatically depending on the, what you're consuming. Yeah. And I think it makes us, I'm not going to say better people. That's what I want to be careful. I'm not going to say we're better than the others, but we're different, and we see things differently. And I think we're more open to thought, creativity, just more open to looking at a different way of doing things. I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I want to I want to reiterate what you're saying here, that this is not about sort of being sort of the better brand of human or the better kind of human because we've experienced psychedelics. It's not about that at all. There are people who will never experience psychedelics, and that does not make them any sort of less capable of creativity or less capable of deep compassion or less capable of deep awareness. Certainly not. I believe what I hear you saying, which is certainly something I've experienced for myself, is because I have had psychedelic experiences, I've been able to experience creativity in me in a way that I simply could not. Now, maybe other people could get there through other means, but for me, like I remember after my initial psychedelic journeys, like my first 3 psychedelic journeys, I started chicken scratch drawing. Now, I don't have actual tactical talent. I don't know how to move the pencil to get it to do what I want it to do and show what I want it to show, but I could see things visually. And I'd never had that kind of visual creativity before. I started drawing comics in my journal to express my ideas or express my feelings or express my thoughts visually. And that sort of aspect of creativity was definitely opened up to me through psychedelics. So I believe I hear what you're saying. It's not to malign anyone who doesn't do psychedelics, but just to say that there's this experience of reality that you end up having because you've done psychedelics.
Absolutely. And in my experience, in my history, I've experienced different, we'll call them drugs, I guess, different types of psilocybin and I've had a single psilocybin experience that I was by myself during that session, and that was the most intense visualization experience that I've ever had. And in hindsight, I wish at that time that I would have had other people with me, because I had such an experience. So I was so used to doing these things with people. And when you're by yourself and you have this massive experience that you can't get away from, like with LSD, I could always kind of climb out of it. You could always kind of raise your head and kind of look around and then sink back in. On the psilocybin, it controlled me for 8 hours straight. And we're talking visualization, sounds, the whole gamut of experience. And while it wasn't a negative thing, it wasn't necessarily a positive thing for me, because it was intimidating. I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't expecting to have such a aggressive experience. And again, I'm using aggressive as in, like, again, the lots of colors, lots of sounds, lots of
Yeah,
things.
it was intense. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was intense.
Super intense.
Yeah,
and you just couldn't get away from it. And so, it is what it is. But I guess the point being is that, all these experiences create who we are.
Yeah.
And I really think that having access to altered states of consciousness, again, I don't want to sound like I'm, again, misaligning people that don't have these experiences, but I think they make us better humans, if I can say that without touching on toes, so to speak.
Yeah, without coming across all judgy. Do you want to be all judgy, Curtis?
Yes.
No, I totally get that. It's not, and it is, it is something to be careful about. There are, there have been some of these, kind of proclamations, like, if you're not doing psychedelics, then, you're not realizing your full humanity. And that is just, I think those are extremes that are exclusionary, and for me personally, like, my experience is that those are exclusionary extremes. It took me quite some time to come to psychedelics. You were exposed to them and engaged in them when you were young. I came to it in middle age. I had no interest in this when I was young at all. So, if someone had told me when I was 23, well, if you're not doing psychedelics, then, then I just don't even know what kind of person you are. Like, I mean, it would have been very off-putting, right? So that's not the message here. That I think I really resonate with your message, that it is a way to tap more deeply into your potential, into your creativity, into your humanity. It's a tool. It's a path to do that.
Well, I believe, and I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but the professor that came up with DNA, I think he was on LSD when he came up with the double helix concept. So, if you think that these substances can be the root of creativity at that level, my God, I mean, why shouldn't we all be taking advantage of that, right? I mean, seriously.
I mean, I'm with you. I'm an advocate for a reason. I'm with you on that. All right. So, like, let's get to it, right? Like, from the double helix of DNA to blockchain. So, my expectation is that, some folks listening will be familiar with blockchain, and some folks listening will not be familiar with blockchain and won't even know why they need to care about blockchain. The reason that we're talking is because I have this sense that, as a person who is an advocate for access to psychedelics, blockchain could be something that really, like, a technology that really supports psychedelics, particularly at scale. So access to psychedelics, access at scale. So that's why we're talking about this, but I do want to make sure that, we don't presume accessibility for people, and then we actually try to, support people with accessibility, kind of understanding what this is all about. So one of the things I was thinking is maybe we could go through the kind of the vocabulary of applied blockchain, like, what in the nonsense are we talking about, right? And we can do that with maybe some living examples, given your experience and, what you've seen and what you're seeing already. Give us some examples that will help us understand the language of blockchain.
Well, do you want to go through you would just want to go through, like, a dictionary of the basic jargon first?
Yeah, I actually have some key jargon that, or, some key terms that kept coming up, when you and I were prepping, and I thought, well, maybe these are some good places to start.
Okay.
All right. So I think the very first one is just blockchain and decentralized ledger, right? Like, these are terms that, I've heard used interchangeably. I've understood you to say that, this is a blockchain is a database that you get information from. And what makes it distinct is that it's hyper secure, right? So I want to make sure, like, have I really got that right? Or, is there some difference between blockchain and decentralized ledger? Like, what are we talking about when we talk about blockchain and decentralized ledger?
So a blockchain ledger can certainly be used to extract data for, business analysis and all that. But on the other side, it's also something that you put data into. And this is and the way that the data is is put into a block and then secured cryptographically and then connected to the next block. So each block only contains a certain amount of data depending on how the chain was developed. And if we say Bitcoin as an example, Bitcoin has a certain number of transactions that can be recorded in, as in like a certain number of megabytes that can be held inside a block. And once they hit a certain number of transactions that create that sized block again, as an example, Bitcoin, that happens about every 10 minutes on average, and a new block is created. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of, SHA-256 algorithms and all that stuff.
Please don't. Please don't go down that rabbit hole.
But the point is that we're using cryptography to secure the data. And so the data is considered, quote unquote, immutable. This is one of
so that's the next term. So what are we talking about when we say the data is immutable? What does that mean?
Let's go back to the decentralized ledger, though, because that's something that I think is also important. Right. Okay. Once a block is created and a transaction is approved, well, okay, it goes two different ways. So once a transaction is approved, that transaction is then written to a ledger. And that ledger is then built over time by these blocks, block by block by block by block. The reason why it's called a decentralized ledger is that there are copies of that ledger all over the world. Again, if we're talking about Bitcoin, there's over 15 million nodes, computers around the world that are keeping copies of the Bitcoin ledger. So that's what it means it's decentralized. It's a country could make, pick a country and they say Bitcoin's illegal. Well, good luck with that, because it's impossible to do. It would literally, unless someone could take the world, electricity down, like you'd have to take the internet down worldwide. And even then, if someone had a copy of a hard drive with the Bitcoin ledger or any other, blockchain ledger, when the power came back on, you could actually bring it all back. Okay. So it's decentralized over multiple nodes, which is again is a term that we use, which is simply a computer or a series of computers or a data center or whatever. So then the data becomes immutable. So what does that mean?
Okay, wait. So pause 1 second. So I want to sum up blockchain and decentralized ledger if I can. Let me see if I get it right. It's like a pop quiz. All right. Yeah. So when we use the term blockchain, what we're talking about is database data storage. Each block stores data. Essentially, a block is sort of an entity of data, piece of data that's stored.
Yep.
And a decentralized ledger is sort of an accounting of all that data broken up across millions of computers all over the world.
Yes, I wouldn't use the word broken up because that makes it sound like they're like different computers hold different pieces. If they're copies, they're complete copies all over the world.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
it sure does. Got it. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great piece of clarity. All right, cool. All right, let's move on to immutability. So why is this relevant? What is immutability? If there's a an anecdote or story you can give to, or an example you can give to explain immutability, what are we talking about when we talk about immutability?
Okay, I've got a great example that I use to explain blockchain to people that don't have a technical background whatsoever, and we can use this story for other understandings as well. But so I'll tell the story. So around the world, so everyone loves chocolate, right? Do you like chocolate? I think almost everyone loves chocolate.
You can't even talk to me about chocolate. Like I will just stop this conversation right now with you and go get some. You're making me think about it. So thanks.
When someone asks me what I want for my birthday, I want a chocolate cake with chocolate icing, with chocolate nuggets in it, with chocolate sauce poured on top, with chocolate ice cream on the side. Right? That's me.
And some chocolate milk. Chocolate milk.
There you go. So the concept of chocolate, most people don't know that chocolate comes from cacao beans, and cacao beans grow in very remote parts of the world based on, certain heights of a mountain. That it only grows in very, very specific places, and those are places like Papua New Guinea, Brazil. There's some places in Africa, but everything has to be just perfect for those things to grow. And because of that, traditionally, cacao beans are grown in very remote places, just because it is what it is. Yeah. So there was a company here in Australia called Ag Unity, and they came up with what's called a Provenance, basically a supply chain tracking solution on the blockchain.
Mhm.
So basically track and trace. And what they did was they gave the farmer a mobile phone. So they gave the farmer in PNG a mobile phone. It was a series of farmers. It was a big experiment. And then there was in the world, at least in PNG, the farmers grow the beans, and then there's what's called a co-op in between them and the manufacturer. And so it's a middleman, effectively.
Got it. And hold on, I just want to make sure when people hear you say PNG, you mean Papua New Guinea.
Correct. And this is just an aside. In PNG, there's 3 mobile networks, but they don't talk to each other. You can't cross call. So almost everybody in PNG walks around with 3 phones, because if you want to talk to someone on another network, you have to use that phone. It's ridiculous. So that's
like here, if I wanted to call my wife who's on AT&T, I would have to have, because I'm on T-Mobile, I'd have to have 2 phones.
Correct.
Wow. Okay.
So trust me, they're not tech savvy people. At least from
they're actually like, yeah, they're actually like way tech. Like if you have to walk around with 3 phones all the time, yeah, you're pretty tech savvy. Yeah.
But the problem that you have is that in the remote areas where the beans grow, we're talking major mountainous regions, right? There's not always cell signals up there. So it was also important that they had a Bluetooth capability, because the phones didn't necessarily talk to the network; they talked to each other.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
So there was an app on the phone. So basically, the co-op guy would rock up with his tractor or whatever, truck, and they would count the beans, and the guy would say, okay, yes, these are how many beans it was. Yes, connect. We both agree. And that transaction went onto the blockchain.
Got it. Okay.
Now, what was happening before all of that was that they were using handshakes. They were using pieces of paper. They were like, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. This is, just trust me type thing, right? So there was, it was rife for fraud.
Yeah.
And once this implementation was done, once this project was implemented, so let's just finish. So once the bean goes into the co-op, there's 3 different things that have to happen to the bean. They have to be broken up, they have to be dried, and then they have to be roasted. Then they're sent on to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer in this region, the biggest one is Cadbury. So Cadbury is probably one of the largest buyers of this. Now, again, what was happening there is that the farmer didn't get paid until the manufacturer received the goods. So the farmer would have to wait 2-3 months sometimes before they actually got paid.
Yeah.
So Ag Unity comes and does this experiment, hands everybody a phone. So the farmer gets a phone, the middleman gets a phone, and the manufacturer gets a phone. All of them are running the app. All of them obviously have different requirements for the app. And that's where we can go down the rabbit hole of functional, non-functional requirements and how we have to spec all that out to make these things work. But the point being is that the farmer would say, yes, I'm selling you this. The middleman would say, yes, I'm buying this amount. And then as the beans moved through each process, it was signed off, and each of those events, if you will, it's what we call it in our language. Each of those events was recorded on the blockchain. And then, of course, the manufacturer could get the beans. And because that process sped things up quite a bit, the farmers could get paid quicker. What came out of that ultimately, though, was the farmers saw between a 300 to 400% increase in their revenues. Because what had been happening was that every event, someone was stealing some beans and or changing the numbers on the beans, right? And just as a side story, this is really hilarious. I use this story again to share people, try to give people understanding of, not only supply chain, but blockchain to people that don't understand it. So I told this story to an older gentleman here in Australia this was about 6 months ago. And I blew me away. This is where consciousness, universe, things start coming together, and it's kind of like spooky, right? Mystic. We talk about mystical time. The guy says to me after I tell him the story, he goes, oh yeah, I used to live in Papua New Guinea, and I used to grow cocoa beans or cacao beans, because it smelled like cocoa, cacao beans, and I used to lose 65% of my beans, and there was really nothing we could do about it because that was just the way things had always been done, right? So here's an Australian farmer who used to own a business and had that experience. So again, this is a real world application of what a blockchain can do. So the best part of this story is not only did the farmers start seeing a huge increase in their revenues, but we have another word, which I don't know if you've got on your list, but it's called disintermediation.
Yes, I do. Yes. So now we're at immutability and disintermediation.
So let's go back to the immutability part. So because every step of the way, every event was on the blockchain, there was no way to to do anything dodgy, as what we say here in Australia. There was no way to rip anybody off because it was immutable. The number of beans moved from here, changed to here, moved to here, moved to here, moved to here, and then got bought. There was no way anyone could rip anything off or change the numbers, right? So that's what we mean by immutable.
Great. Now I have a question, a follow-on question for you. Is that immutability, did that have anything to do with the blockchain being decentralized, or those are two separate things? And the reason I'm asking this is, well, couldn't they have just, just had any database, right? They could have just created a database that sat on AWS and, people put the data in the database and it's fine. Like, why did this need to be blockchain for it to be immutable?
So with a traditional database, and again, in Microsoft done a really good job of owning that space. A traditional database is using SQL Server. Well, SQL, go do some research on how many times SQL Server has been hacked all over the world, multiple times, again and again and again and again and again. So it's a very insecure way of storing data. This is where the blockchain comes into place, right? So the blockchain data is basically unhackable. That this is the underlying beauty of the cryptographic hashing of the data, is that no one can go crack. No one's ever hacked Bitcoin. It's just never been done. There's been a couple of issues, that have come out, but it has nothing to do with hacking. It had to do with code and, issues with the code. But you just cannot go backwards in time and change data once it's been put onto a blockchain. It just can't be done.
And that's immutability. That right there, that's immutability.
Correct.
All right,
and
gotcha.
Then the fact that it's stored across hundreds of potential nodes or hundreds of servers just adds that extra layer of unhackability. Because if you can't hack one instance, and if you do try to hack one instance, the rest of the network is going to see what you're doing, and they're just going to not approve that transaction. So and that's called consensus. So that's another word, right? So we have this network of nodes which are decentralized, and then we all come together and agree that that data is correct and should be added to the blockchain. And that's the consensus part, where multiple nodes make that decision.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Okay, so we've worked through blockchain, decentralized ledger. We've talked about immutability. Now you were going to go, and by the way, I will say, Fazo's farmers, and you finally get that, you can now see how much money you've been losing, hundreds of millions of dollars. I'd have been all up in those middlemen, you owe me some back pay, right? You better give me my back pay, because you have stolen all this money from me all these years, and now I know how much you've taken from me. So that, one of the things that we talk about, and we will talk about more, is transparency. But there's one of the things that, that I've certainly gathered from talking with you and learning more about this, is there's just multiple layers of transparency. I don't want to dive into that just yet. But I can see sort of all the ways that blockchain can bring transparency to an ecosystem. And so that, that's really a great example of, sort of being able to make transparent the inequity and theft that had been happening, and now working that out of the ecosystem. That's pretty powerful.
Well, if you want to hold off on the transparency part, that's fine. But there's a very transparent part of this story, which I think is very important. So we can come back to that.
Let's go for it. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're the way you want to do it now, we can do it now. Go ahead.
Yeah. So another thing that came out of this project with regards to transparency was the chocolate manufacturer, because they could track and trace every batch of beans. They could see exactly what farmer they came from. And as you would imagine, some farmers have better soil than others. Some farmers do a better job. Some farmers have been doing it for generations, and some farmers just bought their farm last year, right? So the manufacturer all of a sudden had a fantastic view into the supply chain. So, and I don't know how much you know about Cadbury, but they have a wide range of chocolates, all the way from super high-end expensive stuff, to throw away, Easter egg type stuff. So if you have the super high-end stuff, then don't you want to go buy the best quality chocolate to do that, instead of having to, so again, it was a win-win-win for everybody except the middleman. And we disintermediated the middleman. And this is the whole thing, is blockchain disintermediates the middleman. And again, that can be, generally, that's a good thing. For some people, that will mean a change of career, unfortunately. But for many organizations, it really brings a massive cost savings and or production insight into the raw materials. So yeah, just again, great example of visibility across the supply chain.
Yeah, and this part is interesting because there was another example I remember that we talked about in prep where you talked about like the CBD oil manufacturer who had like 40 QA people.
Yes.
And this is sort of another sort of area of disintermediation where
Correct.
you don't necessarily need someone like checking quality all along the way if you're able to confirm quality at the very beginning.
Correct.
Depending on obviously what the production process
What the
is.
events are. Yeah.
What the various events are. But like if the farmer, so kind of, but just staying with the Papua New Guinea, we'll come to the CBD oil example in just a minute, but staying with the Papua New Guinea example, what I think I hear you saying is the farmer doesn't necessarily need an intermediary to sort of confirm the bean count now. The farmer
Correct.
can just say on their app, like, this is how many beans are in here, and now it's on the blockchain forever, and that information can just skip over the intermediary and go right to Cadbury. And so
Exactly.
Cadbury can know at the source of raw material production, here's what we're gonna be getting, and so that's what needs to arrive.
Yep.
And so I think that's what I hear you saying in terms of the middle person was disintermediated because essentially Cadbury could get the exact information they needed from the raw material producer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. This is also what Bitcoin is doing to banks. Same kind of
talk just a tiny bit about that, because I think that that's where folks might be sort of more like we've kind of heard about that, right? Like Bitcoin banks, we don't really know what it means though. Like why is this relevant, and how does this help us understand disintermediation?
So if you're, and let's look at this from a company perspective. So if you're a company in Australia and you're a company, in America, and you want to transfer funds, there's a process. And traditionally that process can take up to 3 to 5 days doing an international transfer. There's also, can be, depending on your banks, double fees, right? Because the US bank is going to charge something, Australia is going to charge something, and then the middleman's going to charge something, right? So everyone's taking a clip. Yeah. So Bitcoin being worth over $1 trillion at the moment, the market cap of Bitcoin is like $1.2 trillion, right? So it can facilitate very large transactions. So companies can do cross-border payments using Bitcoin and only pay the mining fee. And it happens in seconds, at worst minutes. And there's no middleman, there's no bank, there's no international entity looking over your shoulder saying, is this, are you laundering money? And I'm not saying anyone's doing that. But the point being is that you're disintermediating the whole financial system as it currently stands.
Got it. So let me just repeat that back to you. So you're company Australia and I'm company America, and I need to pay you $10 million for something that you're going to provide me. So instead of going to my bank, which is then going to charge me, let's say maybe a 1% fee for paying you $10 million, and is going to take like 5 to 7 days to do it. I could essentially say, I'm going to give you whatever amount of Bitcoin equals $10 million. And we're going to put that on the blockchain, and you will know it as soon as the information's on the blockchain, and then you can just pull your Bitcoin down, and that's that.
Yeah, and literally we wouldn't put it on the blockchain. Just doing a Bitcoin transaction, it's on the blockchain. There's no. It's
that's what I.
We don't have to do it. It just happens, right?
Yeah, just essentially saying like we're going to transact that, and it's going to be on the blockchain, and that's that. We're all done.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So that's disintermediation. I think what I understood is like just sort of removing where there are redundancies in a process or redundancies in people, and that actually maybe like what you told me about the CBD oil provider that had all these QA folks and instituted a blockchain as part of their supply chain. They didn't necessarily need to check things over and over and over and over and over again, right? Like that's, and they didn't need like sort of an army of people to go check things out. Do you remember that example you were talking about? And can you speak to that a little bit in terms of how it helps remove redundant, like blockchain can help remove redundant process or people?
Yeah. So again, this particular entity that we were talking to, they had 40, as you said, they had 40 quality auditors. I didn't ask what they were paying. Let's do some assumptive numbers. Let's say they're making 50 grand a year. Well, that's a cool 2 million a year in payroll just for 40 auditors. What if, again, we could be using, again, I'll jump ahead, we're, IoT devices, right? So that's Internet of Things.
Yeah,
Internet of
Internet
Things.
of Things. Yeah.
They're little mini scanners, right? That monitor things as they go by. It could be monitoring QR codes or barcodes or RFID chips or whatever. But the whole point is that, so it's not just blockchain. There's data collection points, right? That monitor the events, and those data collection points then write that event back to the blockchain. So once that's in play, it's almost, and everything's immutable. And once you built this thing and it's working correctly, and you asked me about before garbage in, garbage out. When you're talking about sensors that are automated to grab data off of, again, a QR code, an RFID chip or whatever, it really reduces the requirement for not only human input, but human monitoring. Yeah. So we made the case that we could probably remove at least half of those auditors by implementing a blockchain solution and doing all that automation with IoT devices. Excuse me. They were using IoT devices already, but again, there was a lot of human input, which created a lot of potential error, and that's what these auditors were in place for. So we were proposing to them that we could probably remove 20 of those auditors, which would save them $1 million a year. Our solution was going to cost them about $250,000 a year. So they were going to save $750,000 a year right off the bat on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting, so I need to speak to two things really quickly, because we actually haven't talked about garbage in, garbage out yet. That was from a previous conversation. And so some folks might be listening to like, what are they talking about?
Let me jump back in, because I'm going to take your angle. Those people don't necessarily have to be fired. They could be redeployed to do other things, either up or down the blockchain. I don't know if that's where you were going with this, but yeah, so the warm fuzzy side is that we're not necessarily going to go in and just whack people's salaries, but those people may be redeployed to do more intelligent things, or more things that are more beneficial than just, ticking a box as the things fly by, right?
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so that's, when you talk about sort of removing redundancy, it's not necessarily to just, eliminate, it's not, the notion is not that we're just going to eliminate, quality control. And then it's also not that just like every single thing can be done by robots. But it's that you can actually sort of be more thoughtful about where do you need to check quality? What kind of quality do you need to check? And then can you get that sort of quality in a secured database, and automate it in a way where you don't need humans for every single step of the process.
Absolutely. That's it.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So that's disintermediation. So we've done blockchain, decentralized ledger, immutability, disintermediation. The next thing I want to talk to you about is provenance. This is something that you've talked about quite a bit. And I want to just kind of dig into, what are we talking about when we're talking about provenance? Because I think that also sort of connects back to the example you were just giving about quality control and people sort of the amount of people you need to put in data and what kind of data people need to put in. So can you just talk about like what provenance means? Like, what are we talking about, and how does that connect to some of these other terms?
Yeah, so there's two common phrases we use here in Australia with looking at provenance. So here in Australia, when you have like a field where you have like cows grazing, that is the Australian term for that is called paddock, Paddock. So the phrase that we have for provenance of beef is paddock to plate, right? Okay. So we're gonna monitor all the way from we're going to monitor from birth to plate, but the cow was birthed in a paddock. So that's kind of where that comes from. Another one that we use is grape to glass. So if you're looking at wine provenance, where were the grapes grown? And then what steps of what events transpired to actually to get to a bottle where I can pour it into my glass. So provenance is really just the tracking and tracing of events that are required for something to go from absolute raw product to consumable product.
Got it. So provenance is essentially the tracking of all the production events and being able to sort of trace back anything that's produced, being able to trace it back to its origins.
Yeah. Now, I think if you're a hardcore scientist, they would have a problem with that, because I think in the world of science, provenance has more to do with where is it created. Mm-hmm. but we use Provenance to cover the whole where is it created and then how do we track it along the path. So we kind of expanded the meaning of that word. So again, if you have any scientists, they're going to be saying, no, that's not. But again, we're Australian down here. We stretch things a little bit, right?
Well, I think also too, I mean, in technology, terms have been lifted from the non-tech world, and their definitions have been expanded or shaped in particular ways. So I don't think that that's an uncommon thing. And
Yep.
one of the things that, when we talked about sort of this so provenance essentially meaning a completely visible path from sort of origin to production to use. It's interesting then thinking about the relevance of this for psychedelics access is you want to know that the psychedelics that you're using are actually, you're actually using what you think you're using, right? So they're legitimate,
Yep.
that they are of good quality, and that they have been produced and shown to be effective, right? They have good efficacy. So I think when you talk about provenance, we're talking about legitimacy, quality, and efficacy, and sort of being able to see that because you can see where your psychedelics started and what their path was before they got to you. And it's interesting. There's a conversation that I had with a drug policy reformer, Mohawk, and Mohawk told a story about someone who had gotten some DMT and was online with a guide and was going to take the DMT and work through some trauma with the guide and therapist. And it turns out the substance that the person got was not what they thought they had. And a very, very unfortunate experience resulted. So I think from a harm reduction, risk reduction perspective, provenance actually is not just sort of like this, sort of nice to have technical term. It actually could be sort of foundational and life-saving for folks when we think about psychedelics supply and psychedelics access.
Look, in my humble opinion, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, if people want to know what's in their wine, is it not important to know what you're putting in your body to change your head?
Yeah.
I mean, it's as I said, it's an absolute no-brainer. Even for me, coming kind of from outside the industry, I can see Provenance as an absolute legitifier, if you will. It just adds that absolute layer of legitimacy. And this isn't a sales call, but so our system actually, if there's documentation that's created or signed off on as the process moves from event to event to event, we record that, and that also becomes part of that event. So the actual documentation gets scanned, and that becomes digitized, and that gets put into the blockchain. So as an example, a person at a pharmacy might take ownership, right? They're buying from the wholesaler. That transfer, that documentation, that sales order and everything would literally get scanned and put onto the blockchain. Any documentation would actually be stored and made available through our system to actually look, and you could actually see, okay, this person signed off, blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this actually brings us back now to garbage in, garbage out. This is actually what I wanted to talk about, a few minutes ago.
Yep.
That this is still, humans are still involved in this because we do need people to input information that is valid and viable, right?
Yes.
So it's not, this is what I meant earlier when I said, so the robots aren't, it's not about like the robots taking over. If there's documentation, that documentation has to be validated. And that documentation is likely going to be validated by a human being who understands what the documentation is. And then that documentation goes on to, is scanned and goes on to the blockchain. So it does still seem to me that there is a level of human intermediary that is absolutely fundamental to ensuring that the provenance of any substance that that's sort of recorded on the blockchain, that actually it's like the legitimate information is in the database. And so it seems like that doesn't change. Like technology doesn't change that part, but I might be missing something. So I just want to check that with you.
You're spot on. Yeah, no, you're spot on. Absolutely. There'll certainly be humans required, because as you said, there's going to be humans required to actually create these documents and then read these documents and then make decisions based on that documentation. So you'll never, well, maybe never. Never is a big word. It'll be a long time before we have, as you said, robots or artificial intelligence that's going to be able to replace us. But that is coming.
Yeah. Well, we'll see about that. I'm just seeing. Yeah, it's a different discussion, and it could go a lot of different ways, man. It could go a lot of different ways. All right. So, I think one of the last pieces of vocabulary that I want to talk to you about, and this one seems also quite relevant for psychedelics access, particularly at scale, is non-fungible tokens, which are often just referred to as tokens.
Yes.
Right. So talk to us about what a non-fungible token is, and let's see if we can understand, like, why does this matter for, me doing psychedelics and healing my trauma?
Right. So let's get a definition for fungible. So fungible is one of the number of requirements for something to be considered currency. And fungible simply means that one instance is replaceable for another instance. So as an example, in America, you have a quarter, 25-cent piece. That's not much different than another quarter. Now, of course, you have coin collectors, which will say, wait, when was it made? And so you've got this numismatic, value. But traditionally, a quarter is a quarter. And so
actually, I think what you're saying is when we're talking about transactions, a quarter is a quarter is a quarter.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you would accept one quarter just like you would accept this quarter. It wouldn't matter whether I gave you that quarter or that quarter.
I don't care if it's 1962 or 1978. Just it's a quarter. Just give me my 25 cents.
They represent the same value, and everyone agrees on that. So there's consensus, right?
Yeah.
So non-fungible is the exact opposite, right? So non-fungible means they're completely unique, right? So you would never trade that for that because they're completely unique. So in the beef ledger world, a cow is not the same as another cow. They may be from the same, strain and all that stuff, but each cow is an individual. And so each cow is represented by an NFT. So each cow, or in your world, each batch of grams of psilocybin would be a non-fungible token, excuse me. So each batch is different from every other batch, even though they're all the same. But from a provenance point of view, we would assign a batch a non-fungible token, and that batch number would be basically a non-fungible token, which would then live on the chain.
So that means that this batch is not interchangeable with any other batch.
Right.
And so this batch sort of has its assigned, it sounds like a token is like an assigned identity.
Just be careful when you say the word token, because the word token, at least in blockchain world, can mean many, many things. So we want to make sure that we're talking non-fungible tokens, right? So,
gotcha.
And the short term is NFT. So you can just say NFT. These days, pretty much everyone knows what you're talking about. Now that is getting a bit of a negative press as well, because NFTs, it's a mania right now. I mean, this guy, Justin Sun, just paid $69 million for an NFT from an artist last week. 69 million. So there's an artist named Beeple, Beeple, and he's been creating these non-fungible tokens. He's done one a day for the last 5 years. Okay. He took his first 5,000 non-fungible tokens and put them all together into one piece of art. So when you look at it, it just looks like a bunch of tiny, tiny little squares. But when you zoom in, each little square is a copy of his other NFT. He put that up for auction, and that went through Christie's, like a proper auction house, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the big players in the crypto space in the last 10 minutes bid it up from $15 million to $69 million.
So
one NFT.
Wait, so hold on a second, because this, I think the first alarm bell that goes off then is like, okay, well, if non-fungible tokens are assigned to, psychedelics, do we end up with like designer psychedelics, and we end up with non-fungible tokens for like psychedelics start getting bid up in price, and you start trading them, like is that what we're talking about here?
Well, you've got, and this is in the world of blockchain, cryptos, NFTs, all this space. You've got public marketplaces, and then you have private marketplaces, and then you have private issuances that are never traded. So you can choose to go public and trade your NFTs and go into that market. You can choose to have a closed environment where people could trade NFTs back and forth that represented different psychedelics if you wanted to do that. Or you can simply have a closed system where an NFT doesn't actually have a value to the marketplace. It simply is a track and trace point that we're using in our Provenance model.
Gotcha. Okay, so there are multiple applications of an NFT, is what I think I hear you tell me.
Absolutely, and here's a great idea. You can take an apartment or take a hotel, has 300 rooms in it. You can literally tokenize that building, sell 1,000,000 tokens, and people can buy those tokens, and then they actually own that portion of that hotel. So you can take live real things in the world and tokenize them, create value, and sell those in the marketplace or distribute them in the marketplace, depending on, again, what you're trying to achieve. But it's an amazing, it's going to be an amazing way to invest going forward. You won't have to go buy the whole hotel. You can actually buy $100,000 worth of the hotel, and then you own that percentage of the hotel. And as the property value goes up, your tokens will go up in value. There'll be a marketplace where all the people that own tokens in that hotel will potentially trade back and forth amongst each other because they all, either want to own more or sell off and cash out. So
yeah,
it's an amazing
so here's something that's interesting for me. And as I listen to you talk about this, I'm having this experience that I had back in 2013 when my little brother-in-law, who was about 12 or 13 years old at the time, first started telling me about Bitcoin. Yep. And I remember it was just like this thing in the ether that I had no idea how to get my actual hands on. So I just couldn't pay attention to it. I'm having the same kind of reaction internally to tokens. They're like these things in the ether. So like when you talk about this this artist who put together non-fungible tokens, like what exactly was the artist putting together? What is the thing in the ether, and how do you get your hands on it? How do you get your hands on an NFT?
So in that sense, like if we're talking about art, right? Mm-hmm. You're talking about a visual depiction. So it's a photo. It's like a GIF or a JPEG, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. But it's locked onto the blockchain. And it was funny because I was watching The Five, which is a show on Fox at 5 p.m. Mm-hmm. And they talked about this story. This was their last story of the day on last Friday. And one of the guys, Gutfeld, said, "Oh, well, it would suck if you just push delete all of a sudden." Well, he didn't understand blockchain. You can't delete an NFT. No delete. It's stored on a blockchain, right? So first off, it's never going to get deleted. Other people say, well, I can just take a photo of it. I can do a screen grab and I've got the same thing. Well, the argument there is, well, yeah, you can take a photo of the Mona Lisa. Do you own the Mona Lisa? So who owns this NFT, right? Who actually could, by owning it, I mean, who could transfer it to someone else, right? So you control it with your private keys on a blockchain. And if you wanted to sell it or transfer it or whatever, you simply do that. You simply go in, use your private key. Someone gives you their wallet. You send it over, and all of a sudden, this person now owns it. There's another company here in Australia.
Wait. Okay, we're gonna get to the other company in Australia, but I just want to back up really quickly because you just said like three things there that still might seem ethereal to people. Okay. In terms of like, you just, enter your key into your in your wallet, right?
Right.
So when we talk about these things, I think, just understanding like how you actually access these things. Yes. So a key is essentially like your extensive passcode. It's usually, I don't know, like, I've seen keys that are like 27 characters long, right? So yes. They're like extraordinarily secure passcodes. And your wallet would be, for me, the best analogy I can come up with is like, like my PayPal account. I could think of my PayPal account as a wallet. It's a place where I store some sort of currency of value, whether that's dollars or cryptocurrency or whatever it is. So it's just a place to store things of value, essentially online, right? So it sounds like for non-fungible tokens, they are, I guess, they are sort of pieces of data that have been that are encoded and they are immutable, and someone owns that data, and they have a key that confirms their ownership of that data. Is that, first of all, I want to make sure, like, it's, or some sort of a digital asset. It can be data or whatever it is, but it's a digital asset, and someone has, you know, ownership of that asset via their key.
Yeah, and this is where, this is one of the first things I teach in my class is unfortunately the blockchain ecosystem, if you will, has chosen words from the English language that don't represent what the word means in the English language. Like when you think wallet, right? You think wallet, I think, okay, this is something that's in my back pocket and I put stuff in it, right? And then my credit cards, my money, and my ID, and I carry it around with me everywhere I go. And if I lose my wallet, holy crap, I just lost everything. Okay. In the world of blockchain, a wallet is represented by two keys. One's a public key, one's a private key. Public key is just like your address, just like your listing in the white pages, right? I know that's an old school analogy, but that's it's your street address, and you want everyone,
or the URL of your website, right? For the kids today, like essentially, it's like some sort of address that identifies your location.
Right, your Facebook account, your all thing, you know, all analogous. And so that lives on the blockchain, and then you have a private key which gives you access to go do stuff with whatever is in the wallet. Okay. Now, traditionally, and again, I'm going to just give you some blockchain, more blockchain stuff here. Traditionally, when you set up a wallet for the first time, you're going to be, and this is traditionally, it depends on the system, depends on the platform, the protocol, all that stuff. But traditionally, you would back that wallet up. And by backing that wallet up, it means that you're going to be given, and I know this seems so old school, and it is, and all this is going to change soon, but you're going to be given a passphrase. Now, most networks either use a 15-word passphrase or a 24-word passphrase. So not only do you have your super long string, which is your private key, which is how you access your wallet, you also have these passphrases, which basically allow you to rebuild your wallet. Okay, so once you have your private keys and your seed phrase, you could, and this is the analogy I use. A lot of people are using mobile phones now, and they have apps, and that's where they store their cryptos. And so they have an app on their phone, and they look and say, okay, I can see my app. My cryptos are on my phone. What happens if they lose their phone? Well, the reality is that app is simply a window into the blockchain. So if you lose your phone, it doesn't matter. Your NFTs or whatever cryptos you own or whatever assets you own in your wallet are still living there on the blockchain. You then would get a new phone, get out your passphrase, download the app, and then recreate, right? So instead of creating a new wallet, you basically recreate, and you put in your passphrase, and voila, there's your window open back to your same address.
Yeah.
It's not
yeah. So is it correct to say then that your wallet is essentially your portal in the blockchain? It's like your storage hold in the blockchain?
Absolutely. And the other thing to be aware of is you don't have to have just one wallet. You can have multiple wallets even on the same chain. Yeah.
Kind of like the same, like you can rent multiple storage units at Extra Space Storage if that's what you need to do.
Or you can have multiple email addresses or whatever.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So when we talk about a person's wallet, that's their storage space on the blockchain. There's Correct. A passkey for that, and they can store their non-fungible tokens, essentially their non-replicable digital assets or digital data. They can store that inside the blockchain. Yes. And we started off this piece talking about non-fungible tokens, and it sounds like that this can be data, this can be some sort of digital thing. I remember, as we talked about this, one thing that occurred to me is for therapists who are ultimately going to deliver, once the expectation and the hope is that we get to a place where psychedelic assisted therapy is mainstream. Yep. And people can, talk to their therapist and, ask, do you do psychedelic assisted therapy? And maybe their therapist says yes, or maybe their therapist says, no, I don't do that, but someone else does that.
Yes.
And, the expectation might be that, there's some sort of training or a course or some sort of certification that you might have to do to be a psychedelic assisted therapist. Well, it sounds like this certification or, you know, a special license or something like that, you could actually have that be a non-fungible token. You can scan it and put it on the blockchain and say, like, this is so immutable proof that I am qualified to do this thing. And it occurred to me, like, well, then you might also then have, you know, some sort of regulatory body that essentially, you know, sort of starts to like collect this, and say, you know, these are the certifications that we know these folks actually, you know, are qualified to do this kind of therapy. So I don't know that obviously we would not be trading these licenses, but you might want to hold them in a way that is, you know, sort of hyper secure.
Okay, so and what we're talking about there is, and this is kind of blowing up around the world in any niche, are what are called micro credentials. So like you know, a doctor has to go through 8 years of school or whatever, and then they have to do their time in the hospital or whatever, you know, whatever the process is, right? I know it's a lengthy amount of time, and so that's a degree and then a career and a certificate, and all of those things can be digitized and can be put onto the blockchain. Now, let me take that on the next level, because this is something that I've learned since our last conversation. And again, I'm not trying to get onto the sales pitch. Let's just talk theoretically, okay? Now, our system can do this, but let's not say about my system. Let's talk theoretically. What if a doctor, gets the micro credential, right? They go through the course, they get the certification, and they work through this with a couple of people. In the world of blockchain, one of the things that's becoming very important is reputation-based scoring systems. So what if you could take the patient's review of that experience with the doctor and monetize that? And again, I'm not trying to go down the capitalist route here.
Yeah, but I'm actually just curious though. How would you monetize it? Like, and why? Why would you? I mean, everybody monetizes things to make money, but like, what is the incentive? Who does it serve for that to be monetized?
Okay, so you could play the game two ways. So let's say that a doctor who's had some great experiences comes out on this platform and says, you know, I am providing a great solution, and these are the results, right? And these are the people who are willing to attest to that. These are my patients. Okay. Mm-hmm. You can put that proposal out to the network, and there's a value placed on that. And if the consensus of everyone in the system says, yes, we agree, then those people that agreed can get paid. And so does the proposer. So and this is through tokens. So it's not like I'm handing you money. I'm incentivizing you through a token-based incentivization system. Okay, so again, we're talking about NFTs. Those can be used as incentives to incentivize the network to create a reputation scoring system, which is going to benefit everybody.
Yeah, this is very interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was blown away when I saw this. I was like, oh my Lord, this is just so perfect for this industry. I mean, especially this industry that's going to be struggling for legitimacy in the beginning, and is going to be looking for every way it can to leverage the legitimacy through real world experiences of people.
Yeah. Do you see this happening anywhere else that, you know, there's an analogy? And it's okay if not. I just want to see if is there a story about this happening elsewhere?
Well, again, what's happening with the beef ledgers is you've got people that are, you know, so there's let me deviate a little bit. There's also an incentive in our system for the end user to report back and give a review. Mm-hmm. That review can then be incentivized as well. So as an example, if we're talking about beef, someone buys a steak, they eat the steak, they basically go back into the system and say, wow, that was fantastic, best steak I've ever had, and boom, enter, and they literally can get some tokens back as an incentive. So what, I guess to give you an example, I mean, how many people believe the reviews in Amazon? I know for a fact that there are people getting paid to do reviews on Amazon, right? Bullshit reviews. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you're talking about putting reviews on a blockchain, guess what? They're immutable. They're unchangeable. They're trackable. We know exactly where they came from. There is no way anyone can game that system.
Well,
So
what I
very
think
powerful.
what I think I hear you saying is if they did, so if someone decided, I'm gonna write a bunch of BS reviews so that I can get paid, and there's some sort of kind of uncovering of that,
Yes,
there's a record that is forever. And
correct.
so you can go back to the source of that review and sort of essentially kind of mark that source of review as saying, okay, all reviews from this source going forward are invalid.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So a couple things you've brought up here for, related to non-fungible tokens. One is about ownership and sort of being able to use non-fungible tokens to expand ownership. I can certainly see where this might be relevant around equity in psychedelics. Equity of ownership in psychedelics is particularly related to plant medicines and the growing and distribution of plant medicines. Then we talk about, sort of licensing and certifications, sort of essentially being able to have these as non-fungible tokens so that, people can show with like credibility and legitimacy, I have this licensing, I have this certification. Then you kind of, raise my eyebrows all the way up to my hairline, talking about sort of this kind of review system.
Yep.
Where people are incentivized to give reviews, but those reviews now have a sort of an additional layer of legitimacy to them because the review source can actually be traced.
Correct.
And then if there are a number of reviews that are out there around certain providers, and those reviews are positive, those providers can also now be rewarded. So they are incentivized to provide really good service, and the user is incentivized to provide legitimate review.
Correct. And we also want, like in the world of NFTs, we also want the end user to help us understand that NFT had been consumed. Like we want to know that steak was eaten. We want to know that that psilocybin powder was ingested. And so we want to incentivize them to get that NFT off the network. we really want to know that there's a closing event.
Why?
So
why? Wait. Why do who's the we in this, first of all, and then why is that so important?
Well, it's more, I guess, from a philosophical approach. When you're talking about steaks being consumed, right? Like steaks have a certain lifespan, even in cold storage. I mean, yeah, you can freeze them, obviously, but one of the selling points of this beef is it's never been frozen, so that's part of it. But we as an entity, so in this instance, it's we as Beef Ledger. We want to know when a steak has been consumed. We want to be able to clean our system out. We don't want a bunch of NFTs sitting there that we don't know whether they're been used or not. Gotcha. It doesn't really affect us. It's more like an internal thing. We just want to see, and we know that not everyone's going to do this. This is why we offer an incentive. So, we do offer tokens for people to come in and actually say, yes, this was great, and we've used this, so you can mark this off.
How do you, as you think about this, as you think about sort of that experience, like how would that be relevant for psychedelics? Like how would that be relevant for a psilocybin producer?
Well, wouldn't you want? I'm assuming there's going to be a lifespan for these chemicals, and it might actually be quite short. So if you're a doctor prescribing something, you want to make sure that whatever you're prescribing, the batch is within the time of validity, right? And then if you're a retailer and let's not say a retailer, let's say you're a pharmacist and you're stocking this stuff, you're going to want to know when you need to take it off the shelf. And then the supplier's probably going to want to know that was destroyed, right? Gotcha. We certainly don't want to create a market where the pharmacies are letting these things go off out of date and then they're taking them and going and selling them on the street, which potentially could happen. So my guess is these producers with such a challenging chemical, challenging product, they don't want to be seen in any way, form, or fashion of facilitating any kind of market, creation or consumption.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting.
They would want to know it was either consumed or destroyed.
So it's interesting that it sounds like you could actually create another event in the life cycle of psilocybin or whatever it is, whatever the psychedelic is. You could create another event in the life cycle of the substance that was tied to the and would be illustrated as the removal of the non-fungible token, sort of out of, off the, like sort of the retiring of the non-fungible token on the blockchain. You would retire that NFT. So, you could either create an event in the product lifecycle that said the product was sold. And so if that's the case, then the NFT is retired, or the product has to be destroyed. The substance has to be destroyed in a certain way. And if neither of those two things happen, then you might start like some authorities might start showing up at this particular pharmacy or supplier saying, why aren't you retiring your NFTs? Right. Yep. Like, and so that this is then how you prevent this sort of leakage of substances out into illegal markets. Because there's only two events that could retire the non-fungible token, either sale or destroying the substance.
So it brings up a couple things. So again, getting back to the terminology, in our world, in the world of blockchain, there's a term called multi-sig that simply stands for multiple signatures. And so what you're saying is we can have multiple signatures that can be signed off along the way, with the final signature being either the consumption by the user or the destruction by the supplier.
Yeah, very interesting.
Or the assignment by the doctor, or the pickup at the pharmacy, whatever we as an industry determine needs to be the final thing to sign off. But I just thought of a story which is hilarious. So in doing some of our research around the cannabis and CBD industry, I learned that these testing centers that test for cannabis, they only use a tiny amount of the cannabis that's actually sent to them. And they have these large, let's say it's a bushel, or let's say it's a pound or whatever, half pound, quarter ounce or whatever. They only, let's say they take in an ounce, they only test, like a gram, and they basically throw the rest away. And in this particular instance, they couldn't, once the public, like they had a company that was like a private dump, if you will. They come and pick up, stuff that you're throwing away. Once the company found out it was marijuana, they wouldn't touch it. They were like, sorry, you're going to have, and so there's a whole industry, for those of you that are on this, there's a whole industry that could be created just in destroying marijuana, because no one will touch it.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And you make that an event on the blockchain, which says, yes, that was taken care of in a proper and regulated way. Right. So it really does sort of strengthen the regulation in a way that is not sort of invasive and oppressive to people. It's really about keeping people safe.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we talked about that in our previous chats about, where we want to position ourselves in alignment with the regulators. I mean, this is part of the plan. If you're not working with the regulators, then you're working against them, right? Effectively. So why not work with the regulators to build, we talked about building the railroad tracks for this process, this protocol that we want to develop.
Yeah. Now, to that end, the notion of working with regulators, I mean, actually, we're still in a place with psychedelics, at least, at this point in time, when you and I are having this conversation in March of 2021, we're still in a place where, psychedelics are not, sort of common practice. And so, there's a lot of restrictions around them. When I think about sort of, the beef ledger and sort of getting, from cow to Australia, from cow in Australia to beef in China, I'm presuming there's like a whole regulatory process that involves the consumption of food, right? So, how do you get all of these regulatory agencies in multiple countries to kind of even understand, much less sign on to what you're doing with blockchain? Like, how do you, what does that look like?
Well, in Australia, specifically with beef and the food industry, by the way, Australia is probably the second most regulated country in the world behind America, possibly behind the UK. But there, lots of government here, lots of regulations, lots of rules. And so the regulations for the processing of a cow from birth to plate was already there. What the blockchain did was just sped it up, made it more convenient, added all the values that we've talked about, the immutability, right? The visibility and all that stuff. So in our instance, all we did was say, hey, Gov, we're going to do exactly what you want, but we're just going to do it a better way. And, are you cool with that? And they were like over the moon, right? Because you're just adding more legitimacy to what's already being regulated.
Yeah. Now I don't doubt that, right? But I think that you could be, I think, maybe minimizing like the kind of conversation you had. Like someone had to show up to somebody's regulatory office and like explain this to them, right?
Yes.
Like, so like that's what I'm like, what does that look like? Because I think that's the kind of process that people will, people who are in the in the psychedelics industry will be needing to navigate if they want to put blockchain and supply chain together. So I'm just sort of curious, like what does that conversation look like? How do you open that conversation with regulators, just from your perspective?
Well, I put this question to my mentor, the gentleman who's on one of the chairman of this program, and he has a lot of experience in that space. And his suggestion, which I thought was interesting, was that probably should be outsourced to professionals. Like there are professional advocacy groups that already have the names of the people they need to talk to, and you would simply meet with those advocacy groups. So you're not necessarily rocking up as a farmer trying to get the FDA to believe you. You're going to have a credible group of people, and so the concept is just to use our leverage to use what we have. Yes, we've got the blockchain specialist on, sitting behind me, and he can answer any questions. But really, we're all about just providing a better access, not only to providing regulation in the industry, but we're providing much better access to reporting back to the regulators. We can literally customize everything so that the regulator gets exactly what they want. There's no, because how often do you hear people struggling saying, I didn't know what they wanted, right? They've got a law, but it's so ambiguous. So anytime we find ambiguity in anything, we can go in and clarify that and then create a system which takes that away.
Yeah.
Remove the problem.
Yeah. So I think what I hear you saying is, if there's a psychedelics supplier or just a psychedelics player who wants to leverage applied blockchain for whatever reason, I think the FDA is sort of the big, the big going to be the Food and Drug Administration is going to be the big, regulatory body. And it's really about sort of connecting with the advocacy, any like advocacy within FDA, and sort of making sure that in that space there's this understanding about how blockchain can, and I'm not privy to these conversations, so maybe this kind of thing is like already going on. Like one would hope that there are already these conversations happening about how blockchain can actually inform and strengthen sort of the regulatory process. And what I think I hear you saying is just working with advocacy groups who can sort of connect into that kind of conversation. That's how you all, were able to manage it with food and blockchain, food supply and blockchain, just kind of working into these advocacy groups that are connected to regulators.
Absolutely. And you mentioned globally. So, that regulation and those doors, right? Who knows who in those doors? You're much better off working with local groups that already have that awareness and knowledge. And I'll share with you a story that, I don't know, you might want to edit this out at the end, but it just goes
it depends on how many swear words you use. So
yeah, no, it's not about that. It's a little bit conspiracy theory, but I remember watching a video with a lobbyist in America, and he was literally saying he was embarrassed at how cheap it is to buy a senator. And I'll kind of leave it at that. He threw out some numbers, but he was like, these guys should have more respect for themselves. I mean, like for XYZ dollars, which is a low six-figure number, you can pretty much get whatever law done that you want. So, you're also talking about big bucks, right? So there's that layer as well. And there's going to be that issue. There's going to be corruption in any government. Yeah. And I don't care what you say. That's part of it. So that I'll just leave it at that.
Well, so what are you saying though exactly? Are you saying that, that part of like how you move this forward is, sort of having these side conversations with lawmakers? Like what's the point you're making there?
There probably will be some of that. Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. All right.
Especially when you get into more illegitimate countries.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though, because when I think about, what blockchain brings, it brings this transparency. It sort of brings, brings reality to light. That seems like something maybe some politicians are into that and some politicians are not, right?
Correct.
So to some degree, it could be actually sort of antithetical to what some politicians would want. It actually would make it harder to sort of go that route to bring, to implement blockchain. It would actually be harder to go the political route because it is actually going to bring a lot of transparency.
I think this is why you're getting some, not necessarily pushback, but not necessarily fantastic uptake with some of these government entities for that very reason. What if all of a sudden all the money that came out of a budget was accountable? That changes everything. Changes everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Look, we have had a very sort of very in-depth sort of blockchain, blockchain conversation here, and we're going to be coming to the end of our time. There's two things that I want to ask you. One is about blockchain, and one is about you.
Okay.
So here's the thing I want to ask you about blockchain. So, I mentioned earlier, 2013 is the first time I think I heard about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Crypto also, like even that word, crypto security, and even that word, I think, so still is like just sort of weird and spooky for some people. Like, what does that even mean, crypto? Like, what does that mean exactly? Actually, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean when you say crypto?
Okay, so traditionally, cryptos is an all-encapturing term that refers to all blockchain projects in the world right now. And there's over 8,000 of them. Okay. The term crypto comes from the word cryptography. I mean, they're all being hyper secured by using cryptographic hashing. And
cryptographic, when we use the word cryptographic, I mean, I understand that as like encoding, like it's just like really intense encoding.
Correct. It's exactly what it is. Yeah. I mean, go watch the movie. I think it's Code Breakers or something like that. It talks about back in World War II when they successfully cracked whatever the Nazi code was, and it helped them win the war.
Okay. Got it. All right. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about crypto. And, I remember hearing about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, back in 2013, and how it was going to be revolutionary, and it was going to take over the world. Like it was just, you weren't going to be able to live without it. And here we are in 2021, and there does still seem to be a lagging uptake of cryptocurrency, at least out in sort of, everyday life. Like maybe there are places where it really is, very much in use. And it's, obviously there's some kind of value going on because Bitcoin's now $54,000 a coin. So seriously, it's like, there's something about it that's, that's got some traction somewhere. But out in everyday life, I'm not paying for movie tickets with Bitcoin or going to the grocery store with Bitcoin, right? So I can imagine kind of with blockchain, it might be kind of the same conversation, that there's this notion, and, and I started, watching talks about this, and, and in 2014, people were like, blockchain's going to change everything. And in 2016, people were like, blockchain's going to change everything. And in 2018, people were like, blockchain's going to change everything. And it's like, at what point is blockchain actually going to change everything? And so I guess what I would ask is, for folks who are working in psychedelics and thinking about this, is this like a thing that you're like, I can afford to think about this kind of later because it's really not a thing right now? And I know you might have some degree of bias in answering this question, but to the degree that you can, at least like be objective and kind of take that context, take that context to heart. Is it the case that like it's important and it matters, but I don't really need to, this isn't really a thing, and I don't really know when it's going to become a thing? Or is it like, actually, this is way more important than we know, and we're actually behind? Like, what's your perspective for, for folks who are in the psychedelics ecosystem and sort of might be thinking about this?
Well, in my humble opinion, we go back to the provenance concept, and we go back to the other concept of, your industry. Well, this industry, psychedelics in general, is and probably will for the near foreseeable future going to face, let's use the word backlash, let's use the word negative viewpoint, let's use the word bastard child. I mean, I think you're
Use
fighting
the word bastard child.
Well,
Okay.
look, at the end of the day,
I get. Okay, that is one word we could use. I think what you're trying to say is that psychedelics is going to face some uphill challenges, is what you're trying to say.
It's not going to. You're thinking in the future. You're facing challenges right now.
Right now. Okay.
Are you not?
Fair. Absolutely fair. Yeah.
So if I were you, or if I were your advocacy group, and you really wanted to add legitimacy to this industry, wouldn't you want to be using a technology which by default is the most secure technology on the planet to facilitate a view into the production, creation, transfer, and consumption of your products?
Well asked. That's a well asked question, Curtis.
So instead of answering the question, I will put it right back to you, and you tell me, is that helpful to your industry?
Yeah. Okay. All right. That is a fantastic consideration. Thank you for that. Yeah, all right. Here's my last thing I want to talk to you about.
All right.
You have this background in software and software education training. Education's kind of in your bones, right? Like you've been kind of an educator for a really long time. I've got
just over 35 years of experience teaching different stuff.
Yeah. And now you've turned all this sort of energy that you have for educating, you've turned it to crypto and blockchain.
Yeah.
What about blockchain stokes your passion? What is it that has got you just, maybe it's like a clinical term to use the word obsessed, but you do seem wrapped around blockchain in a way that is, that you're not letting go. And so what is it about blockchain that's really stoking your passion?
All right. So the year was 1996. I was 29 years old. I was 2 years away from graduating college, and I was working at America Online. Mm-hmm. And my college was being paid for by my grandmother to get a degree in finance. It was a very specific outcome that we were trying to achieve for a very specific reason. But I was having to, make a living. So my roommate worked at America Online, and he got me a job in there. And so I was doing tech support at America Online back in 1996. I don't know if you remember those days, but that was when you'd get a America Online cassette in your, you did mini disc in your mailbox every week, and we were inundating the country, right? And I was looking around.
Those America Online CDs were just everywhere, and it would give you like your 25 minutes of internet access for the month or something. Yeah.
In 1996, they were 3.5-inch floppies. They weren't even the CDs yet.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Oh, woo, those are the, man, that's like, you know what? At this point, I'm in my rocking chair thinking about the old times, and you would like plug in it like, yeah, I remember that.
Absolutely. My first modem was 156K, and it was the best modem you could buy at the time, 156K. I mean, come on, are you kidding me? Anyway,
wait, hold on. I got to piggyback on that story, dude. I just have to tell you the first time that I ever used the internet. So I had gotten I was working at a newspaper, and I had gotten hired to start the newspaper's website. And I had never heard of the internet before the job interview for this. And the only reason I interviewed for the job is because my managing editor at the time said, you need to go interview for this job. And I was like, okay. So, they sat me down and they told me, someday soon, you're going to be able to open a computer, and you're going to be able to send a note to someone, and they're going to get it right away.
Right.
It's called email. And I was like, what? Like, I remember like it blew my mind. Like I was on the edge of my seat. I was like, are you kidding me? And you're going to be able to make a phone call using the computer. And I was like, no freaking way. Like it was mind blowing back in the day.
Yeah.
And so I get hired, and our he'd be an engineer now, but he was called a technologist at the time. I walk into the office, and our technologist, he's 17 years old,
right,
is sitting at his computer. I sit down at my computer, I look at it, And then I get up and I go around the computer. And then I finally say, okay, dude, I don't really want to hear a lot of shit about this. Just how do you turn on the internet?
Right.
And he was like, oh my God, I can't believe they've sent me another one of you. And that is how I got on the internet. So that's 1998 for me.
Right.
For you, it happened 2 years sooner. You're at America Online in 1996.
Yep. And so I'm looking around, and AOL was a really cool place to work. There was no dress code, free insurance. Like they wanted the best of the best, right? And there were not that many people that could do this stuff,
Yeah.
And of course they had an 8-week training session, but you had to know a little bit about computers. And my mom was smart enough to buy me a computer like 6-7 years before that. So I was playing around with a computer way before that. And so, but again, I'm looking around, and I mean, literally there's guys walking around dressed up as vampires, and a guy walking around in his slippers and robe. I mean, they didn't care. You could, and I had hair down to halfway on my back, and I had a little, gargoyle up on my, so we were all just the freaks of the freaks of the freaks. Right. Yeah. But some of these guys were like super freaky, like way out, like they had grown up programming. And so they were like, woo, I mean, out there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what happened was I, graduated and ended up quitting that, and then went off. And my first real job was with a computer training company, New Horizons, which is how I ended up here in Australia and New Zealand. But the point is had I just stayed at America Online, and become a team leader, and then become a manager and moved up the ranks, we wouldn't have this conversation right now, because I'd be retired on an island with my AOL stock.
Yeah.
So why am I so excited about blockchain? Why was I the second person in the world to complete the advanced diploma of applied blockchain, one of 3 people in the world that can train it? And why am I such an advocate and enthusiast? Because, man, I missed out on that wave of technology. And not only the technology, this was before Facebook. This was before MySpace. This was before McAfee. This was before, Microsoft was around, but just think of the industry that blew up on the back of the internet. Yeah. And you remember the dial-up code and the dropouts, and your mom would pick up the phone and your line would drop, right? All that crap. This is where we're at with the blockchain right now. It's clunky. It's ugly. There's a lot of people competing. We haven't yet come up with our TCP/IP yet. We don't know, if there's going to be one protocol or whether there's going to be a dozen protocols, but this is where we're at.
Wait,
1996 right now in blockchain.
And when you talk about these protocols, essentially that's just like lingo for standards. Like we don't have the standards yet. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Which TCP/IP ended up becoming the standard for, to build on the backbone of the internet.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm so excited, because I shouldn't be on this call with you right now. Had I woken up, gotten out of my finance focus and said, oh my God, this technology is going to change the world, I would be a different person now. Granted, I've had a great life and great experiences, and, it's been wonderful, but I'm ready to take this technology by the throat and be part of this wave. And I'm trying, and I hope to be part of the group, the face of this thing going forward.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, I can definitely see, sort of blockchain and psychedelics being at similar inflection points, having sort of like a lot of similarities in terms of, challenges and the, the mystification and the stigma and adoption, like having an access, like it being actually sort of, accessible, and people can adopt it and people can see it alive in their lives. It's interesting. I think one of the things I've heard you say is that everyone is going to be using applied blockchain on a daily basis, whether they know it or not.
Correct.
Let me say that again. Yeah. Because let me say that, because I might have rushed through that. Everyone is going to be using applied blockchain on a daily basis, whether they know it or not. Right. And I know for me, psychedelics were relevant to my life well before I knew they were shaping my life. I didn't know that, as I was going through Alcoholics Anonymous, that one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous had deepened his spirituality with psychedelics, and that, some of the things that he was learning on LSD were making their way into 12-step program. I didn't know that. I didn't know that, Deepak Chopra talks about, one of the sort of birthing moments of his spirituality was doing LSD. And I've definitely leveraged his teachings on meditation for my own life. So it's interesting because I think even if we can't see these phenomenal forces shaping our lives, they do have relevance, and they certainly have relevance for each other. This is not the first conversation about what I've seen called crypto psychedelics.
Yep.
This is not the first conversation for that. Hopefully this is a moment that can contribute to that conversation. Just get people to understand that there's a lot of relevance around transparency, validity, credibility, legitimacy, safety, and harm reduction for people, in using applied blockchain and psychedelics. And so hopefully we do get to that place where they go hand in hand, and that's the norm, and they are very much mainstream.
Well, to use a cliche, it's a marriage made in heaven, to be honest.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, like, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that? But yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely agree.
Mm.
Curtis, thank you so much. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the teaching. I really appreciate it. Like, what, actually, do you have, like, you're the teacher on this one. Do you have any final words, or like anything you'd like to close out with?
Well, first, Tammy, I want to thank you for allowing me onto your platform. I really do hope that this conversation will spark a whole lot of other conversations, and not only between you and I, but amongst people who are interested in where all this is going. I guess just to leave you with, the fact that, again, this is a wave of technology which is going to change the way that we interact with not only what we consume, but what we do every day. It's no matter what happens, your insurance, your finances, your interaction with food, chemicals, consumptions, this is all going to be living on top of a blockchain. And so I guess the advice that I would give anyone is start to learn about this. If you want to learn about Bitcoin, learn about Bitcoin. If you want to learn about careers, go to crypto.jobs. This industry is not only legitimate now, but it's really starting to blow up. Back in 2017, there was no jobs, right? Unless you were a Ethereum developer. Now there are growing companies that are looking for talent everywhere, all over the world. And one of the coolest things is that many of these organizations that are looking for staff and support and employees, you can work remotely. Mm-hmm. So I guess being an advocate for blockchain, this, for those of you that want to have a career change, this could be a career path. And as I say in my video, this wave of technology is rolling across the planet right now.
Yeah, fantastic. Curtis, thank you again. And I know we have more conversation we're going to have. So until next time.
I look forward to it, Tammy. Have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That wraps up another episode of Keys to the Kingdom. Thanks so much for listening. Check out the show notes for resources we discussed, and follow the Keys conversation on Twitter at Psychedelics Key. Until we meet again, remember, you are connected, you are love, and the kingdom is yours.